declare that. They declare your glory in the sky. It proclaims your handiwork, Lord. We thank you, Lord, for giving us another opportunity to be together, to be learning, to be growing closer to you. Lord, we have such great assurance in your Son, Jesus. Let us continue to recognize, Lord, that it's by his stripes that we are healed, that he was bruised for our iniquities. He was made sin for us. Let us see your handiwork and be awestruck by you. Guide this class, guide our discussion, and all this important topic of Christian evangelism. In dear Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So just by way of review, in week 1, we looked at a theology of evangelism. And we said the essence of evangelism is the message itself, the gospel of Jesus. And evangelism then is the event of communicating this message. And we had talked about how the power of the message of the gospel doesn't rest in the Christian, but in the actual gospel itself. And we as Christians we're ambassadors in that sharing of the gospel. And then in week 2, when we discussed week 2, Sam Chan, he gave us a organized approach to doing evangelism, and he did that by showing us how we could do that through telling our own story. And you might remember that we talked about the introduction, we talked about the crisis moment of our story, and we also talked about the bridge moment in our story. And I've been encouraged by some of your comments. I have gotten text messages from some of you, and one person told me that she's already used this. She's already been using this process in her own evangelism. So very encouraged by that, that we're kind of seeing this at work already. And last week we looked at how to craft a Bible presentation, a basic Bible presentation. And then this week what we're going to do is we're going to do something that's a really interesting aspect of evangelism. And the title of this week is called Evangelism to Postmoderns. Has anyone ever heard the term modern or postmodern or modernity or postmodernity? I was hoping very few hands would go up. Maybe we could, because what we're going to do is we're going to go over it. In the video, what we have is Sam Chan spends the first 12 minutes or so talking about what is the difference between modernity and postmodernity. And I had watched the video and I said, you know what, maybe I'm going to play this, but I feel like he was cruising at it like warp speed. And I said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to find a good handout on postmodernity versus modernity, and then we're just going to go over it, and then we'll go from there. And so we're going to spend 10 to 15 minutes just understanding the purpose of what we want to do. And if you're married, maybe you could share a handout, because I think I made 50. I don't think we have 50 here, so. So the first part of what I want to do is I want to share the difference between modernity and postmodernity. The reason why I want to do that is because he's going to go right ahead with this concept of doing evangelism to the postmodern, and some really great stuff. And I don't want to get bogged down by any of the words. And so the article that you have in your hands is done by John MacArthur. You might be familiar with John MacArthur. And he's going to just help us understand the difference between modernity and postmodernity. And it's 2 pages. I trimmed it down to 2 pages. And just to and we're going to go through it. So modernity to postmodernity from bad to worse. And we'll give you a handout right over there. And so let's just read. Modernity in simple terms was characterized by the belief that truth exists and that the scientific method is the only reliable way to determine that truth. Most people in this room were raised around the era of modernity, because it was 1600s down to about 1980s. So most of us in this room were raised in the era of modernity. Modernity is going to be very normal to a lot of people here, that it's an era. And so there's a good working definition. I just want to reread that. Modernity in simple terms, the era, was characterized by a belief that truth exists and the scientific method is the only reliable way to determine this truth. So the culture, I'm not talking about a Christian culture, we're just talking about a non-Christian culture in the era of modernity, This is them. Truth exists, and scientific method is the only reliable way to determine that truth. And we're going to get there by human means only, so such as through our science, right? Back in your reading. In other words, modern thought treated human reason as the final arbiter of what is true. The modern mind discounted the idea of the supernatural and looked for scientific and rationalistic explanations for everything. But modern thinkers retain their belief that knowledge of truth is possible. So just to slow down, the modernist, those in modernity, believes in truth. God is eliminated from that equation. There can be no supernatural explanation in modernity. And so back in your reading, they were still seeking universal and absolute truth that applied to everyone. Scientific methodologies became the chief means by which modern people sought to gain that knowledge. So what happens then when you seek to know truth, but we seek to know this using only human reasoning, and we leave God out of that search? What happens? Chaos, yeah. I think I heard foolishness here somewhere as well. Romans 1 calls it foolishness. And back in your reading, those beliefs, modernity, gave birth to Darwinism, which in turn spawned a string of humanistic ideas and worldviews. Most prominent among them were several atheistic, rationalistic, utopian philosophies: Marxism, fascism, socialism, communism, theological liberalism. So we have a lot of philosophies here with a lot of problems. And we look at the state of the world under just this modernistic thinking, and we can see terrible, destructive ideologies. And you're probably thinking, well, if that's modernity, right? Modernity didn't work, did it? And MacArthur goes on, and he says, modernity, that era, its devastating repercussions were soon felt worldwide. Various struggles between these ideologies dominated the 20th century. All failed. After 2 world wars, nonstop social revolutions, civil unrest, and a long ideological Cold War, modernity was declared dead by most in the academic world. So like you may have predicted, if a modernist thinking has tried to embrace truth without God, then you shouldn't be surprised. Modernity, in many respects, failed, and it's failing. And back in our reading, the symbolic death of the modern era was marked by the fall of the Berlin Wall. Anyone alive when the Berlin Wall came down? Yeah, a lot of people will pin the modernity, the end of modernity there. At the fall of the Berlin Wall. It says here, one of the more apt and imposing moments to modern ideology. Because the wall was a concrete expression of modernity's misguided utopian worldview, its sudden demolition was also a perfect symbol for the collapse of modernity. All right, so now John MacArthur is tying the death of modernity to the Berlin Wall coming down as kind of like a time frame, 1989, somewhere in there. So the modernist, right, we have to just simplify this. The modernist and their truth claims failed, ? Where do we go from here? Because there's been a vacuum that's been created, right? Where does our culture go? Our world, if our world says, the way that we know truth is through my human reasoning, right? And it's through the scientific method, and we have to eliminate God from that. When we turn to modern, then we say, that didn't work. There's a vacuum that's been created, and the question is, where do we go from here, right? Enter postmodernism. Is everyone tracking so far? Can everyone know what modernity is or was? Everyone tracking? All right, let's keep reading. Postmodernism. Okay, so postmodernism, according to the new ways of thinking, accordingly, the new ways of thinking have been collectively nicknamed postmodern. If you've been paying attention to the world around us, you've probably heard that expression a lot. The term postmodern has been used increasingly since the 1980s to describe several popular trends in architecture, art, literature, history, culture, and religion. It's not an easy term to explain. because it describes a way of thinking that defies and even rejects any clear definition. Questions, comments, concerns so far about anything on modernity or postmodernity? Postmodernism in general is marked by, and here's the definition, okay? A tendency to dismiss the possibility of any sure and settled knowledge of the truth. Does that definition make sense? Okay, so we have a great definition, working definition for modernity, and now we have a great working definition for postmodernity. Just to repeat this, postmodernism it's marked by a tendency to dismiss the possibility of any sure and settled knowledge of the truth. So modernity was characterized, right, just thinking out loud, by the belief that truth exists, scientific method. Postmodernity, no settled truth. No settled truth. So would you agree that that's the trend that we see in the culture today? There's my truth, there's your truth, there's his truth, and there's her truth, and there's, what was that? Oprah Winfrey, okay. Anyone else want to add to Oprah Winfrey? The culture that we're in now, right? There's no settled truth, and you're kind of feeling this now, right? You're in postmodernity. So to keep reading, postmodernism suggests that if objective truth exists, it cannot be known objectively with any degree of certainty. Objectivity is an illusion. When we work in the hospital, we take blood pressures, and when we take a blood pressure, we get a number. Now, is that an objective thing or a subjective thing? It's objective, right? We can say the number is 120 over 80, or if it's high, it's 140 over 90, right? It's objective, and they're basically saying objectivity in general, it's an illusion. You and your absolute truth, it's an illusion. Nothing is certain, MacArthur says, and the thoughtful person will never speak with too much conviction about anything. Strong convictions about any point of truth are judged supremely arrogant, hopelessly naive. Everyone is entitled to his own truth, right? And you're shaking your head over there. That's I want to go over this because he's gonna talk about evangelism to this world that we live in now. If you were to challenge me, and this is MacArthur, if you were to challenge MacArthur to boil down postmodern thought into its purest essence and identify the gist of one single, simple, central characteristic, I would say it's the rejection of every expression of certainty. In the postmodern perspective, certainty is regarded as inherently arrogant, elitist, intolerant, oppressive, and therefore always wrong. The demise of modernity and the resulting blow to rationalistic human arrogance is something certainly to celebrate. What the author is saying is the death of truth without God, that's something we can celebrate. We can say, okay, it didn't work. Oh, obviously, it's without God. But then he goes on, he says, from a spiritual perspective, however, the rise of postmodernism has been anything but a positive replacement. And so the vacuum that's been filled by modernity is there is no truth. And he's saying that's bad. Postmodernism, he goes on, has resulted in a widespread rejection of truth and the enshrinement of skepticism. Postmodernists despise truth claims, and they spurn every attempt to construct a coherent world view, labeling all comprehensive ideologies and belief systems meta-narratives or grand stories. Is the Bible a meta-narrative? Is the Bible a grand story? Someone said yes. Yeah, absolutely it is. The Bible is the grand story. It's the only meta-narrative we care about. And what they're saying is postmoderns, they reject meta-narratives. It says they spurn every attempt to construct a coherent worldview. Does the Bible give us a coherent worldview? Yeah. And it says they spurn every attempt to it, labeling all comprehensive ideologies and belief systems, meta-narratives, or grand stories. Such stories, they say, can't possibly do justice to everyone's individual perspective. and therefore are always inadequate. Naturally, the postmodernist recoil from absolutes. Does the Bible give us absolutes? Sure, it's full of them, right? And does not want to concede any truths that might seem axiomatic or self-evident, it says. Instead, truth, if acknowledged at all, becomes something infinitely pliable and ultimately unknowable in any objective sense. Postmodernist, she's saying they feel truth is pliable. It's moved. The goalpost can move. And it's unknowable in any objective sense. So postmodernists don't like your absolutes. They don't like your meta-narratives. And postmodernism, therefore, singles a major triumph for relativism, the view that truth is not fixed, truth is objective, but something individually determined by each person's unique, subjective perception. And all this is ultimately a vain attempt, this is where it's going, a vain attempt to eliminate morality and guilt from human life. And this is John MacArthur. There's more on this, but I trimmed this down. Does everyone have a basic gist of what's going on when we say modernity and then we say the word postmodernity? Because I don't want these words to go over anybody's head today. Questions, comments, concerns, thoughts at all? Go ahead, yeah.
I remember hearing they went through several dictionaries of what the word truth meant. And I believe it was the Webster's 1828 dictionary. The number one definition was Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life.
Life, yeah.
And then there were several along the way, and then they ended with the Webster's dictionary of 2000. It said the number one definition was as one perceives.
Wow. Yeah, so truth has gone from Jesus, the way, truth, and life, and to as one perceives it to be. Yeah, and so many in here are I would say most in here are product of modernity. We love the fact that we're defending the resurrection. Show me evidence of this, and show me proofs, and show me this, and postmodernists, they're not asking those questions. Because your truth is your truth because you believe it. And she doesn't believe it, and her truth is her truth. She believes that. And so, painful place to be, but this is where we are. So just going to play just maybe 3 minutes of the first video, and then we're going to skip through the sections of this because we went over this handout, okay?
When I went to college in the 1980s, my friends knew I was a Christian. So they would ask me questions like, how do you know there's a God? How do you know there's life after death? How can you believe in miracles? Soon, I had an answer to almost every question by using the same logical sequence of answers. It went something like this. How do you know there's a God? Well, I know it's true because Jesus says it's true. But how do we know what Jesus says is true? Well, because Jesus is God and he proves it by rising from the dead. And they would say, but how do we know that Jesus rose from the dead? And I would say, because the Bible says so. And they would say, but how do we know the Bible is true? And then I would show that the Bible is a historical, reliable document corroborated by eyewitnesses and other sources, and it's been transmitted accurately to us today. And ta-da! Just like that, I had answered every question. And I soon developed my own talk series, How to Answer Tough Questions That Your Friends Will Ask You. And I went from church to church and youth group to youth group and conferences to conferences, giving this same talk. And for about a decade, my audiences loved it. But something strange happened. In the early 2000s, I was invited to be the speaker at a youth conference in Missouri, USA, and I gave them the same series of talks, How to Answer Tough Questions, and the audience was completely unimpressed. They could not have been less impressed. They were not persuaded by my logical sequence of answers. They rolled their eyes at my ta-da moment. Even worse, I found out they weren't even asking or being asked the tough questions that I was answering. They had a new set of questions, and they were wanting a new set of answers. Well, what had happened? Well, I'm sure you know the answer. At some stage in the last few decades, we moved from foundationalist reason and we became suspicious of meta-narratives and claims of ultimate truth, and we moved away from the age of modernity into the age of postmodernity. And the methods of evangelism that once worked so well in the 1980s no longer had the same appeal in the 2000s. In this lesson, we'll take a closer look at what happened, and we'll outline the challenges that postmodernism brings to the task of evangelism. And I'll suggest some fresh ways of engaging in evangelism in our new cultural environment. So let's begin. The age of modernity.
You know, it's a great question. I do know that they've looked back and they've seen, and I'd love to see maybe other thoughts about the why, but they've looked back and there's been wars and there's been ideologies and there's been failed ideas, failed thoughts, and so there's been a rejection of a lot of that. Yeah, yeah. Um, while we're, go ahead.
I was just going to say decline of family structure
Yeah.
then left a lot of people, young people with, it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't those examples for them. There was, so I was not tore down.
The results, because
Yeah.
subjectively, or
Go ahead.
What do you personally think he picked 1980 as that point of
What he said was, so it's interesting that you picked that, because I was reading through John MacArthur, the handout, and he had said that was like one of the visual representation of a failed system, and it was around that time. And I don't know if it was, he mentioned the Berlin Wall fall, but that was probably just the general time frame, you know what I mean, of when we saw a shift there. Mhm. Well, we've had liberalism for longer than that as well. So, um, mhm. I was in an airplane last year, and I was in an airplane with a young man who was in his 20s, and born in the world of postmodernity. And what a brilliant young man this man was. He was an engineer, and he went to a great engineering school. And as I got to talk to him, I talked to him about his parents, and his parents were from Cuba, and he was an immigrant from Cuba. And he was raised in America, and he was very much Americanized. And although he wasn't Christian, he had a really good perspective as a postmodern. He said, you know what, I've realized that my parents were kind of scratching to make a living. They were working themselves to the bone like dogs. They were believing in this. He told me about his beliefs. And he said, I don't want to be any part of that. He said, he seemed to have very little interest in his parents' modernity's views of absolutes. And essentially what he told me was, listen, you guys have your truths, that's fine, but I have no interest in that. I have an interest in just taking it easy, exercising, hanging out with my girlfriend, that sort of thing. And it was a whole different kind of a viewpoint, which I thought was kind of weird from an engineer, but an engineer in the postmodern times. Oh yeah, thanks.
isn't going to be beautiful somewhere else. Context is everything. And that's postmodernity's claim. Context is everything. So now let's look at Christianity in a postmodern age. What are the features of the postmodern age which will now affect the way we evangelize? Let me suggest a few things. Tolerance is now the highest moral good. In modernity, truth was an absolute. Truth was objective. Truth was external to the person. But in postmodernity, my truth is subjective. It's internal to the person. It's a product of my culture, my tradition, my experiences. So in postmodernism, we can't say someone is wrong because who are we to impose our truth claims on them? They have their truth and we have ours. And to say that they're wrong is to claim a privileged vantage point and to criticize their culture, their tradition, and their experiences. Also, postmodernism thinks that all religions are equally valid. They're essentially saying the same thing. We're worshipping the same God. It's just we have different perspectives based on our different cultures and traditions. So you're a Hindu because you grew up in India. You're a Buddhist because you grew up in China. You're a Muslim because you grew up in the Middle East. And you're a Christian because you grew up in the USA. Also, there are no absolutes. There might be objective external facts, but we can only know them through subjective, biased interpretations. So any claim to absolute truth is a use of power and violence upon the other person. In the movie Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, which came out in 2005, Obi-Wan was still not sure if Anakin Skywalker had converted to the dark side yet or not. When Obi-Wan confronts Anakin about this, Anakin replies, "If you're not with me, you're my enemy." And at that very moment, Obi-Wan knows that Anakin has sadly turned to the dark side. How? Well, Obi-Wan tells Anakin, quote, "Only a Sith Lord deals in absolutes." So when Christians make absolute claims, we sound like a Sith Lord to our postmodern audience. We have joined the dark side. Also, postmodernism is unconvinced by proof or evidence. Modernity want to prove. Prove to me the Bible's true. Prove to me there's a God. Prove to me that Jesus rose from the dead. This is because modernity believed in foundationalism. All truth must be based on a prior truth claim, and all methodology is neutral. But postmodernism is unimpressed by proofs. When we prove that Jesus rose from the dead, ta-da, they are unconvinced. They say, of course you can prove it. You believe it. Your starting point determines your end point. Also, postmodernism recognizes a diversity of ways of knowing. Modernity only recognized reason and the senses as valid ways of knowing, but postmodernism recognizes a variety of ways of knowing: tradition, culture, feelings, experiences, stories, emotions, community, and testimony. For example, when our first son was born, my wife and I had a lot of trouble feeding and settling him. And so my friend Tim, who was a physical therapist, recommended to us an osteopath. And he said to me, "Listen, you're a doctor. I don't know how you feel about alternative medicine, but we took all of our kids to this osteopath and it's worked." And so my wife and I were so desperate, we took our child to the osteopath. And I remember she would hold our baby son like this, and she basically just went like this for about an hour. And on the way out of each session, my wife would say, "What do you think she's doing?" And I said, "Don't ask, you just gotta believe." And so we did 6 sessions and it worked. Our son was able to feed and settle. Now, I'm a doctor. My friend Tim was a physical therapist. We are in the tradition of evidence-based medicine. And I remember when I was teaching a seminary, I asked the class, who here is horrified that we took our son to an alternative medicine therapist who was non-evidence-based? And only a few hands went up. And I said, well, you are children of modernity. And I said, who in the class is thinking, why not? There might be something to it. And the majority of hands went up. And I said, well, you are children of postmodernity because you recognize a variety of ways of knowing. Also, postmodernism recognizes a variety of perspectives, especially from different cultures. When I was in Chicago, I went to a Chinese church, and a Caucasian Australian friend of mine called Jason, his mother was in town. She was not a Christian. She was just there for a few days. He asked, would my Chinese church be a good one for him to take his mother to for the Easter service? And we all said, no, she'll find it too inaccessible. So I had to go somewhere else for Easter, and I came back a few weeks later, and I asked all my Chinese church friends, did you notice if a Caucasian guy came to your Easter service and if he had his Caucasian mother with him? And my Chinese church friends said, yes, we saw a guy and his mother there. And I said, you know what? His mother wasn't a Christian. And all my Chinese friends went, oh, that would have been the worst Easter service to take your non-Christian mother to, because Chinese church services, they're long, the preaching is translated, so now it's twice as long. And Chinese have this circular logic rather than this linear, straight line Western logic when they preach. They're just all over the place. So I went to Jason. I said, hey, I hear you took your mum to my Chinese church's Easter service. How was it? And he said, she loved it. I said, how did she like it? It was long. It would have been all over the place. And he said, no, you got to get it. My mum has always thought that Christianity was a Western religion. And now here she was in a Chinese church hearing about Jesus. And they were speaking in Chinese, and they had translated it into English just for her. Also, in postmodernity, ethics has become the barrier to belief in the gospel. When our non-Christian friends think of Christianity, they don't think of good news, salvation, forgiveness, freedom, love, or eternal life. Instead, they think of hate, fear, power, violence, and oppression. They think Christians are unethical because of their perceived views on euthanasia, abortion, and marriage. Thus, our non-Christian friends view themselves as the good guys. They are the liberators on the right side of history. They see Christians as the bad guys, the oppressors, threatening to drag us kicking and screaming back into the dark ages. Let's now look at evangelism in a postmodern age.
Video on characteristics of the postmodern. In the next section, what we're going to do, and we're going to spend the rest of this class here, is we're going to go over the thought process of the concepts of evangelism in the postmodern age. Like, this is going to be the practical part. Give us some suggestions. Tell us how then we should do evangelism in this age to these people.
Authenticity. The way we live is just as important as the words we say. We speak the truth, but in love. 1 Peter in the Bible was written to Christians in the first century, people of different cultures, of different languages, of different beliefs, and different perspectives, very similar to our 21st century postmodern age. And 1 Peter stresses the Greek noun anastrophe, which is translated the way you live, the way you live, the way you live. So Peter's key argument to Christians in a pluralist age is we need to be authentic. The way we live is just as important as the words we say. Hospitality. I never noticed prams until I had a baby and then we had to go shopping for prams, and suddenly I noticed they are everywhere. I just had not noticed them. It's the same with hospitality in the New Testament. Once you look for it, it is everywhere. Up until now, we've probably only emphasized word gifts like teaching or preaching or evangelism, but we haven't noticed the gift of hospitality. But hospitality provides the space for the word gifts to flourish. There would be no teaching, no preaching, no evangelism without hospitality. Jesus ate and drank with tax collectors and sinners to the point where he was accused of doing it too much. He was accused of being a glutton and a drunkard. Hospitality does several things for our evangelism. It provides the space for evangelism. It's where conversations happen. It's where trust is formed. Hospitality shows that the gospel is real. It shows the gospel works. And the family meal is one of the most powerful gospel proclamations that we have. And we forget how special and attractive it is for family to eat together. I have a friend called David who became a Christian, and many years later, he said one of the things he most enjoyed about hanging out with me, and I thought it was going to be maybe me sharing the gospel with him, me opening the Bible with him. He said it was the family meal that I used to invite him back to. And there he saw the gospel working in a family meal. Hospitality is also an example of true tolerance. We love and we eat with those we disagree with. Jesus eating with the tax collectors and sinners is Jesus eating with those he disagrees with. And hospitality is also a powerful apologetic. It's hard to accuse a Christian of being a hater, a bigot, or a homophobe when they're having you over for a meal. We should also use testimonies. Rather than saying, this is what Christians believe, we should mix it up with, this is my story. This is the story of how I became a Christian, or this is a story of why I'm a Christian, or this is a story of the difference Jesus makes in my life. Once upon a time, the modern person asked, give me the facts, is it true? Now the postmodern person asks, give me your story, is it real? So I've started mixing it up. In evangelistic events where I used to get asked to give the talk, it used to be someone would give their testimony and then I would come to give the Bible talk as the final word, the facts for people to believe. But now I've mixed it up. I've started doing my Bible talk first, and then someone gets up and gives their testimony. I'm giving them what is true, but they're now giving what is real. We should also use stories. The modern person said, give me the facts, give me an argument. But the postmodern person says, give me a story. What does this look like? Stories work well because they invite the listener to assume the worldview of the narrator. The listener has to suspend disbelief and see the world the same way the storyteller does. I once had to speak on the topic of hell. And instead of using a reasoned argument for the existence of hell, I told the story that Jesus told of the rich man and Lazarus. And then I simply asked these questions. Why is the rich man in hell? Is hell a real place? And how do we not end up in hell? I use a story to explain hell rather than a list of facts. Ravi Zacharias says, give them a story.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to ask you a question. Was there anything from that video that really stood out to you? Anything that just jumped out at you? Anything you'd like to discuss from the video? So when I want to start with a story. That's what we're going to do. A number of years ago, it was late on a Saturday in December, and my family and I, we took a vacation, and we packed our bags. And the day after Christmas, we flew 1,800 miles south to an island called Antigua. And we got off the plane, and we made our way to the taxi. And it was a taxi van. In the taxi van, there was a woman who was there. Her name was Imelda. Imelda did not appear to be someone who had a lot of money. And I wouldn't say that she looked poor, but she definitely didn't strike me as someone who came from a rich family. She didn't live in a big house or any of that. She seemed like an average person on the island of Antigua who happened to have a van that she was using to make a living. And I noticed Imelda was listening to gospel music, and she offered to shut it off. She goes, I can shut that off for you. And we were like, no, leave the music on. Leave the music on the van. And actually, Imelda, we're looking for a church in the morning to go to. And we had prayed about that. And so Imelda said, okay, I'm going to take you to church, she said. And then it was decided the next day, it was 9:15 a.m., she was going to pick us up, and then she was going to take us to church, and she picked us up. But the next day came around, and she showed up to where we were, and this time we weren't alone in the van. There was other people in the van with her, and the other people that were in the van with her weren't just tours. They weren't like random tourists. It was Imelda's daughter, and it was Imelda's granddaughter, or grandchildren. And so myself and my wife and Hope and Caleb, we got to sit with Imelda's family. And as we made our way to church, we talked with the granddaughter, we talked with the daughter, and she sort of just kind of brought us into her family. And if you looked at Imelda and you looked at the color of her skin and mine, we could say that we couldn't have been farther from we were so different. She was a Antiguan who was proud of her Antiguan roots, and the Antigua ran deep in her blood. And but yet when she brought me into the van, I wasn't just some like random family. I wasn't just some random tourist. She brought me into her family, and she recognized that I was in need of a church. And there was a sense that Imelda said to us, come with me. I'm going to show you my Jesus. Come with me. And it was one of those events in my life that I just have never forgotten. But on the other hand, like that event for me was very convicting, because I thought, if I were in her shoes, right? If I were in her shoes and some random tourist got into my car, some strange man I never met and some strange family that I've never met, would I have brought them to my church? Or would I have just pointed them in the direction of my church? You see, Imelda, what she could have done is she could have given me a business card. She could have given me a bulletin, and she could have just kind of pointed me in the direction of my church. But she knew we didn't have a ride, and she knew that we didn't know the island, and she knew that she could provide the ride for us to church. She could kind of like hold us by the hand and bring us there. And she was a seemingly average woman from Antigua, and she had very little means. And what she did was she used the van that God gave her to the glory of God. And I've never forgotten her. And I always think about the story of Imelda, and I said, you know what? That we would be a church, right? That would say like Imelda, come with me, I will show you my Jesus. Come with me. And one of the sections of the lecture that struck out with me, I don't know if you caught it, but is where Sam mentioned how Christians make absolute claims about truth and about, we sound like a Sith Lord, he said. But as Christians, we have to continue to be speaking truth. We can't stop that. We have to be clear about what is true and what is not, whether it be abortion or marriage or whatever it is. But when postmoderns hear truth, from their lens, it looks, they're viewing it as hateful. They're viewing it as you're being violent. You're viewing it as you're being oppressive. I was just having a talk with my wife about one of her coworkers about this yesterday. And the way that they view you is unethical, and they view themselves as the one who's ethical. They view themselves as the one who's loving. You're being unloving, they would say. So how do we do evangelism to a world that's unconvinced by proof? If we said we're in the postmodern world, how do we do evangelism in a world that doesn't care about your truth? A world that thinks they're right, or he's right, or she's right. Well, Sam listed two things. Do you remember what the two things were? One was authenticity, and the other was hospitality. And I want to say this about those two, authenticity and hospitality. Those are not necessarily things that you do, but these are conditions of the heart. And yes, there's action involved and with authenticity and hospitality, but they spring out of a condition of the heart that's been changed. Well, authenticity, he said, the way that we live is just as important as what we say. We speak the truth in love. And so maybe someone would read 1 Peter 1, 14 through 15 for me. Because that's where he was going. He didn't mention that text, but that's where he was. 1 Peter 1, 14 through 15. Yeah, 1 Peter 1, 14 through 15, if you have it.
As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. But just as he who called you was holy, so be holy in all you do.
Thank you for reading that, Harper. Notice it says there, in all you do, be holy. And in my ESV, it says in all of your conduct. 1 Peter in the Bible was written to Christians in the first century and people of different cultures, people of different languages, different beliefs, different perspectives on life, very similar to where we are now. And 1 Peter stresses that Greek noun, anastrophe, and which translated the way you live, it's conduct, and the way you live, and Sam mentioned it. And Peter's key argument to Christians in this pluralist age is we need to be clear and be authentic. We need to be careful in our conduct. The way we live matters. The way we live is just as important as what we say. And so for us to be authentic, as I was thinking through this week, our external reality, who we are on the outside, needs to match the person that's on the inside. So our external reality needs to match the internal reality. I can remember years ago I was at a conference, I was at a men's conference, and there was a bunch of us guys there from the church, and it was a fellow Christian turned to me, and he said, when I come to church, I've just gotten so good at kind of just putting the mask on, just putting on a mask, and you know what, Josh? I hate that. And what he was saying to me is, I'm faking it just makes me miserable. And the mask that says I know what I'm doing, the mask that says I got it all together, the mask that says I'm a really kind of a joy-filled, happy Christian, that was like the outward appearance. But the outward appearance, what he was telling me when I summed that up was that outward appearance, what he was putting on, it didn't match what was going on the inside. Now, who is in control? Who dictates what's going on in the inner reality? Like, who is aware of it? Let's say it that way. Who's aware of it? Who knows what's going on the inside? Yeah, so in Psalm 139, verses 1 through 4, the psalmist writes this: "You have searched me, O Lord. You know me. You know when I sit. You know when I rise. You discern my thoughts from afar. You discern my going in and out and lying down." And God knows your inner reality. He knows the inner person, who you really are, and he knows about my thoughts. And so the one commentator, he wrote about this text, he said, all the motions and actions, both of the inward and the outward man, are naked and open before him. David says, "You've searched me, O Lord. You know me." And my driving point is just this: that your inner reality needs to be in line with your external reality. And when we're authentic, those two are matching up. So because God knows. He knows when we're putting the mask on. He knows when we're just kind of checking boxes. He knows when we're just going through the motions. He knows when we're trying to appear to be enthusiastic about a text and we're just really bored. And he knows that when we're doing this thing called Christianity, but it's running like second fiddle to everything else in our lives. This thing called Christianity, he knows when our relationship with God is taking a back seat. He knows that. And it's not authentic when we're doing that. It's not authentic. And Sam was saying we as Christians need to be authentic. We need to actually have that inner reality that's aligned with God. If we have that relationship with God, that inner reality is locked in, that's going to affect that external reality. That's going to make us authentic. And we're not going to have to fake that because people see that. My suspicion is that Imelda, at the heart level, my suspicion, knew that God was at work with her in her van. And an invitation to pick us up and bring us to church, she knew that God was paying attention. And it's not something that she put on. I think it just was who she was. Because the inside of her life, the inside of her heart had been changed. And so to be authentic is to have a heart that's been changed. We are authentic when God affects who we are on the inside. But there's another strategy for evangelism. Does anyone remember the other strategy? Tell a story. Yep. The other one was hospitality. Hospitality. He did say tell a story. Hospitality. How would you define hospitality? Anyone want to throw a shot at that one? Define. How do we define hospitality? You open your house. Yeah. Do you want to broaden that out a little bit? Is it just your house? Yeah. That's really good, Tino. Tino said, when you open your house, but not just your house, everything you believe in and everything that you have, you share. I think that's a better definition than I have here, Tino. Yeah. One of the dictionaries said the concept is often used with terms like guest, stranger, sojourner, and it's useful to limit the meaning of hospitality to benevolence done towards those who aren't in your circle of friends. The literal meaning of that word is love of strangers. But Sam had mentioned in the lecture about hospitality, and he said that when you look in the New Testament, it's everywhere. Hospitality is everywhere. And why don't we look at we don't have time to do all of these, but maybe look at a few of these verses here. How about 1 Peter 4, 8 through 9? Maybe someone would read that one for us, 1 Peter 4, 8 through 9. We might have a handout from there, but I don't have the handout today. Yeah, 4, 8 through 9. You see that there? There is another one.
Keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling.
Thank you for reading that. Now, notice that text there. It says, show hospitality to one another without grumbling. Is that like saying just maybe every once in a while, or is that just kind of can we just kind of dismiss that one? And the obvious answer is no. It's right there in the Bible. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. Okay, Luke 14, 12 through 14. Maybe someone would do that one for us. Who's got that one for us? Luke 14, 12 through 14. Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, we often think about Jesus going to these houses, right, and doing these great miracles and preaching the gospel. Excellent. That's first order of business. But we too often forget about the woman that's providing the home, or the man that's providing the home, or someone that's providing the food. Mary Magdalene, who was with Jesus in Luke chapter 8, it talks about how she provided for his needs. And I always think, what are needs that he would have had, But yeah, he would have had needs. And there was tons of needs at that time, and as is now. But yeah, so maybe someone could read that for us. Luke 14, 12 through 14. So who is that telling us? In the text there, you're giving a dinner or a banquet, and it talks about two different types of people. And who do we have here? We have friends, right? Friends and your brothers. He says, do not invite them, but he really makes mention of it in verse 13. When you give a feast, invite the poor, invite the crippled, invite the lame and the blind. Jesus ate and he drank with tax collectors and sinners. Hospitality is an easy one to miss. And even after you see the word hospitality, and that's the concept going on there, it's an easy one to dismiss. Like, yeah, okay, I know I got to do that, and just kind of dismiss it. But in Titus chapter 1, verse 8, maybe we could get another volunteer to read Titus 1, verse 8, because I want you to see that as well. Paul is giving instructions, and he's getting instructions about assigning elders, electing elders, and he's saying this is the kind of person that we need to have as an elder in Titus. And so Paul's given this instruction, and as a part of this instruction about who should be our elders, in Titus chapter 1, verse 8, maybe someone could read that for us. And this is a part of that section. Thank you.
Rather, you must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined.
Thank you for reading that. So it says there, be hospitable there, right? He's not, now is Paul telling Titus to elect elders whose wives are hospitable? Like, just make sure that you marry the right wife, and the wife that you marry has to be hospitable. Is that what he's saying? I just want to take just a quick time out here. If you're going to the Easter breakfast, please sign up for the Easter breakfast, and we're going to leave this here for you. Okay? All right, so is Paul saying, hey, you know what? Just when you get married, make sure that you marry someone who's hospitable. She'll cover that. She'll check that box for you. Is that what he's saying? Right? Okay, he's not saying that. It's obvious. We're laughing about that, right? Now, are our wives huge advantages to hospitality? Sure. But who is he talking to? Who is he talking about in that text? Talking to believers, yeah. Talking to believers. And it says there, and they're talking about the qualifications of an elder, right? And so we're asking this specific person to be hospitable. And be hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. So yeah, he's not necessarily telling Titus's wife to be hospitable. He's telling Titus to be hospitable. And we are at a huge advantage when we have a wife to help us with hospitality, sure. But the call first and foremost went to Titus, and he should see it as his primary role. And I thought that was a helpful perspective by Sam when he was talking about Jesus and Jesus eating with tax collectors and Jesus eating with sinners. And he noticed how we often lose sight of the fact that someone provided the space, the place for them to sit and eat. Someone provided the food. Someone washed the feet of the person that was walking in. Hospitality, he said, provides the space for the word gifts to flourish. And I really connected with that story where Sam was talking about his friend David. And his friend David became a Christian many years later. And he said, well, what is it, David, that, what really kind of struck you, David, as he talked about his walk, his story, right? And David remembered as being crucial to him was the family meal that he was invited to. That was hospitality there, right? The family meal. It was hospitality that struck out to him. So hospitality as a means to evangelize to a postmodern world is one great strategy, and that's where we are today. What are some real obstacles to hospitality? What are some real obstacles? Because someone in here is thinking, oh man, you can't be asking me. I just bought the granite countertops. Come on, you know what I mean? Someone here is what are some real struggles, real obstacles to hospitality? Money. Let's start there. Money. Okay, so I had a professor once who was teaching a class on hospitality, and he told us this story. And he said when he was invited to a missionary's home, and he went into the missionary's home, and this professor was with his whole family, and they were having dinner, and then there was an opportunity for other people to come over, and it was kind of unplanned. Well, this missionary invited other people to the house. And so the house got even bigger at that point. Well, missionaries, as you know, have a very, very low budget. And he goes, what the missionary did was he had a pot of soup already cooking, and he added more water to the soup. And he told that story about how the missionary took the little bit of pot of soup and just watered it down. And I thought about that. I'm like, man, that probably didn't cost him a lot at all. You know what I mean? So I think we have to realize that money can be an obstacle, but hospitality really is something that comes from the heart. And I think that professor, that stuck with him enough to put it in a seminary class, and it stuck with me now, So I think that for me, that was huge. It's okay to be creative with your means because, keep going. You were saying, Pastor? Yeah, yeah.
When you're talking about this, being in the Near East, in Jerusalem, and thinking it seemed that there, especially the Arabs, if someone comes to their home and asks, and hospitality is, they'll pick out the best stuff. They'll give you a meal that's phenomenal, and they do it because that's their culture, and we don't have that kind of culture.
And I'm glad that you said that. We don't have that kind of a culture here. So what happens when we show hospitality, invite that person in? It's something different. I know in some countries, if you build a new house, in some countries, you're forced to by law to build a spare bedroom. And the purpose is because you're required to take people in. Hospitality is built into that culture. Okay, other obstacles to hospitality. Other obstacles. So you have your hand up, you can, go ahead. It's open for them, so yeah, it's open.
Besides in your own home, God gives us so many, across our path, so many opportunities for hospitality. We were coming back from California with our pastor and his wife, and this man sat beside us. We started talking to him and found out, like, we're from Bridgewater. We found out he was from Bridgewater, but his nephew was going to have to come pick him up. So we said, no, get in touch with your nephew. We're going to Bridgewater. You can come with us. And we had a lot of things to share and talk with him about. And it's just a hospitality in that form, in that sense, of someone seeing that example so many situations.
Yeah, it's not always your home. Absolutely. We had when we were going to start the 20s and 30s group, we had a family in this church that says, hey, if you want to meet in our home, you can meet in our home. And I thought that was so nice because they were just like going to open their home to us to do the 20s and 30s group there. And so, yeah, there's other people's homes as well, right? Yeah. Another obstacle to hospitality. Someone said money. It's a good one. It's a good one, Arthur. What other obstacles because there's huge obstacles, I think, that are spinning in our brain here, especially living in Massachusetts. Obstacles to hospitality. How about time? How about time? So in New England, we drive fast, we talk fast, we play fast, we work fast. We have no time for anybody, right? And not too long ago, I was playing catch with my son in the backyard. We're playing catch, and my neighbor was on the way over, and he wanted to come over and talk. And what I realized that he wanted to talk about life, and so we stopped. And his wife came over, and his daughter came over, and the daughter wanted to see the chickens, and so we showed them the chickens. And what I realized is that, but in my mind, I was like, man, I just kind of play football with my son here, And but I had to, you got to kind of check yourself, like. No, this is an opportunity to slow down your role because you're moving too fast, and show hospitality to this family with these chickens. So there was a hand up back here, Danielle.
You know, we may not have lots of time, but you can be hospitable to people just in the store, like wherever you are.
Yeah.
If someone needs help with something, it can just be something small.
Yeah.
I think that's just as valuable. And
Absolutely, absolutely. Another obstacle to hospitality is the word sacrifice. And I think about, I think about maybe a mom who has kids and the husband is working full time. And we all know what that looks like, And now the thought process of the mom and dad to say, hey, we're going to open up our home on Friday evening, that's going to take your time. It's going to take sacrifice. And there's going to be cleaning. I can remember one time we had people over and there was a door that got broken. It's still broken to this day. That was years ago. It wasn't you, Arthur. And so, no, it was many years ago. But there's sacrifice involved, and so we just have to be real about that. That sacrifice is real, and we should be willing to be able to do that. Safety is another concern. There are certain situations that we need to be wise. That people should not be coming into our homes, and we need to be wise about that. But I want to say that there's a couple obstacles to hospitalities that we have to be clear about. But let's not be afraid to use hospitality to open up our lives, to be compassionate to the needy. Jesus ate with tax collectors, he ate with sinners, and there were homes that were open for him to be able to do this. Other questions, thoughts, comments, or concerns about either authenticity or hospitality? Yeah, go ahead.
Both of us being in the medical field, we can see that the authenticity and hospitality is how we care for someone who's ill, or someone who's ill when they're more of a Christian background, or so much more accepting and tolerant of what's going on around them, and accept the fact that one of the nurses tied up with someone who's really sick, even though mom's sick.
Yeah.
I think we can just example of that, and I know I carry a lot because my entire cohort group has nothing to do with religion, and they'll get doing the side talk of, oh, sorry kid, you're not like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, you talk about hospitality, and there's one thing that patients like to do. They like to tell their story. And even like on Sunday, during after the service, sometimes I'll be downstairs, and just the opportunity to be able to talk to someone. This Sunday I'm hoping to get some welcome bags together to be able to give some welcome bags to new people. So if you guys are bored and want to hang out with me, come find me. We can give some bags out together. But there will be an opportunity for evangelism after the second service on Sunday. But anyone else? Comments, questions, concerns? And that can make its way into the church. I was raised in a home where the grandmother had a plastic cover over the table, and my dad he's from Jamaica, and so he'd never had anything. So when he comes into the living room, he sits on the ground. He doesn't sit on the couch, and so just that gets into your mind a little bit, and then you go into your home and you see the kids scratching up the floor, or maybe their friends breaking that door, right? And you become more concerned about the door than you are the heart of that child. And it's real. All right, so one more comment, then we're going to finish with a story, or two more comments.
I had an experience when I was a young boy down in Southfield, Virginia, where my family came from. And I was down there visiting with my uncle and his wife. And they had nothing. They were really literally very poor people. They lived right on the old Route 1. And we were sitting out on the front porch just as my aunt was getting dinner ready. And this
One more comment.
Beyond just even that family meal and things like that, just the opportunities in the sense of with your home, every time we had an empty room, the Lord there would be something extended to us. We had two unknown others with us, just different people over the years that God put into our lives and crossed our paths. And some received the Lord and some didn't, but
Using your home.
just that using what you have, He's given it to us.
Yeah, and I think this class I don't think this is something that you haven't heard before. It's more just kind of like going back to this and saying, hey, the Bible tells us to be hospitable. Let's be intentional about being hospitable. Okay, let's finish with a story. On a dangerous seacoast where shipwrecks often occur, there was once a life-saving station. The building was primitive, and there was just one boat, but the members of the life-saving station were committed and kept a constant watch over the sea. When a ship went down, they unselfishly went out day and night to save the lost. Because so many were saved by that station, it became famous. Consequently, many people wanted to be associated with the station to give their time, talent, and money to support this important work. New boats were bought, new crews were recruited, a formal training session was offered. As the membership in the new life-saving station grew, some of the members became unhappy that the building was so primitive and that the equipment was so outdated. They wanted a better place to welcome the survivors pulled from the sea. So they replaced the emergency cots with beds and put better furniture in the enlarged and newly decorated building. Now the life-saving station became a popular gathering place for its members. They met regularly, and when they did, it was apparent how they loved one another. They greeted each other, hugged each other, and shared with one another the events that had been going on in their lives. But fewer members were now interested in going to sea on life-saving missions. So they hired lifeboat crews to do this for them. About this time, a large ship was wrecked off the coast, and the hired crews brought into the life-saving station boatloads of cold, wet, sick, half-drowned people. All different people. Some could speak English well, some could hardly speak it at all. Some were first-class cabin passengers of the ship, and some were just deckhands. The beautiful meeting place became a place of chaos. The plush carpets got dirty. Some of the exquisite furniture got scratched. So the property committee immediately had a shower built outside the house where the victims of the shipwreck could be cleaned up before coming inside. After the next meeting, there was a rift in the membership. Most of the members wanted to stop the club's life-saving activities, for they were unpleasant and a hindrance to the normal fellowship of the members. Other members insisted that life-saving was their primary purpose and pointed out that they were still called to a life-saving station. But they were voted down and told that if they wanted to save the lives of those various kinds of people who would be shipwrecked, they could begin their own life-saving station down the coast. And you know what? That's what they did. As the years passed, the new station experienced the same changes that occurred in the old. It evolved into a place to meet regularly for fellowship, for committee meetings, and for special training sessions about their mission. But few went out to the drowning people. The drowning people were no longer welcomed in that new life-saving station, so another life-saving station was further down the coast. History continued to repeat itself. And if you visit that seacoast today, you will find a number of adequate meeting places with ample parking and plush carpeting. Shipwrecks are frequent in those waters, but most of the people drowned. And I think about that, and I read that story, and I'm like, let us never be like that life-saving station. Let's pray. Oh, dear Heavenly Father, we are grateful that you've given us the gospel that's changed our lives. Forgive us for the times, Lord, that we have not used our time wisely, and I speak personally on that one, Lord. Embolden us, Lord, now. Give us the courage. Give us hearts that will obey. Send us out to do your work with joy, knowing that we can make an eternal difference, Lord, in the lives of those that we meet. In Jesus' name that we pray.